Welcome everybody to our webinar between SpotDraft and Ruli. Our conversation today is going to be focused on AI and legal careers. Imagine that in 2025. I don't think you can have a conversation without those two letters. I don't think you can have a sentence these days without those two letters involved. And so the goal for our conversation today is really around careers, skill sets. What does this look like for us individually, in what we need to learn and what we need to be doing? What does it look for us? What does it look like for us as folks who build our teams, either in legal operations or in the legal department or both? And what does it take to grow those teams? I am joined by a fantastic panel who I will turn over to in a minute to do introductions. But before that, quick introduction on me. I am Akshay Verma. I am the COO at SpotDraft. I was a practicing lawyer for about 7 years, and for the last 13 years have been on what we call the business side of the law, in a variety of different roles, heading up legal ops at Facebook and at Coinbase, and have been at SpotDraft coming up on 2 years later this fall. Excited to moderate this panel. And with that, I will turn it over to our panelists. And Susan, let's please start with you for a quick introduction.
Sure. Susan Packle. I'm the head of global legal operations here at Atlassian. I have about 20 years in the space, also on the business side of the law. Actually started in HR, believe it or not, and moved over into operations. Had experience at big tech companies, built the first legal ops team at Uber, Hilton, and eBay, and just excited to be here with you all today. And I'm in Reno,
Thank
Nevada. Forgot to add that.
you. Marcus?
Hi, my name is Marcus Hartman. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona right now. I'm the Chief Legal Development Officer for Dragon GC. We're an AI platform specializing in corporate securities law. Most of my career has been on the legal side, and most of it has been in-house. So I've had two public company roles as general counsel. So this career subject matter is very interesting to me, and I think I'm in this space now primarily because what I saw at the end of sort of 22 and 23 with the LLMs, with ChatGPT, felt like it was upending everything that differentiated us from other professions, from the LSAT to the bar exam to being an associate. So that's why I'm here.
Very cool background. John?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is John Lee. I'm here in Redwood City, California, and I'm the general counsel and head of strategy here at Ruli. Previous to Ruli, I was at another legal AI startup, Ivo, and previous to that, I was at one of Google's investment funds for a number of years. And before that, I was in private practice for a while. Been a practicing lawyer for about 20 years now, and obviously, like, have dived head head first into the whole AI, legal AI space. And so definitely excited to be talking about it with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, John. I wonder if we've taken the dive head first or AI has kind of taken the dive head first into us. I think maybe that's the question we can grapple with.
Mhm.
One other thing that I would love for the panelists to do is just as I did in the chat to everyone here, pop your LinkedIn into the chat. We'd love to all connect with you, and keep the conversation going after the webinar as well. Well, look, I think it's no surprise there's a big shift, a monumental paradigm shift going on in the legal profession with generative AI. And I want to make sure that that's very clear. I think that's an important marker. AI, in some form or another, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, has been around for a long time, probably as long as most of us have been practicing law. If you think about what e-discovery turned into after kind of manual document review, which I did as a paralegal before going to law school, with technology assisted review and so forth, those technologies have been present in our profession. But generative AI is really, really changing the game. And anytime a piece of technology, a tool like this comes into a profession, it has a monumental impact on how people need to go about their work in that profession. And that means learning, and that means skills, and that means education. And so those are some of the things that we are going to dive into. Part of the foundation for some of the statistics that I'll share is the AI impact report that SpotDraft ran a few weeks ago. And we'll share that as well after the webinar so you can have a copy. But I want to start with a particular statistic. And Marcus, I'll throw this one over to you and get your thoughts to kick us off. from that report itself. It said the statistic was 71.4% of organizations that were surveyed witnessed no role changes after AI adoption. What are the biggest shifts you're seeing in legal careers today thanks to AI, despite that statistic? Marcus, thoughts from you?
Well, I think the biggest shifts I've seen is, first of all, I think it's Pierce Ford or is a partner-only law firm. So in terms of career, I think the business model is starting to be impacted in the sense that people are starting to say that model of leveraging associate and associate work for partner profits may be taking a shift, and I think we're seeing evidence of that. So even though the 74% is there, I think lawyers are generally Luddites. That they've been slow. They were slow to embrace the fax machine, slow to embrace email, slow to embrace putting things into the cloud. So this isn't really surprising, but I just think the economics are going to really have an impact on on why this is here. So from the client side, when I was a general counsel, I was already having discussions with outside counsel like, why is my invoice not changing in light of AI? Because if you're telling me you're not using AI, then you're really wildly inefficient. And I can't really justify having, again, full disclosure, I learned the fundamentals of corporate law at by being sponsored by clients who paid for my time to get up to speed. Ironically, once I was in the position of sort of paying for law firm invoices, I found that to be wildly inefficient and not something I wanted to pay for. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just saying it's an economic reality on the client side.
Well, I think you gain a certain level of empathy with respect to the client side of the equation with that. And then there's business realities that aren't necessarily front and
Right.
center for you when you're outside counsel. Susan, you oversee outside counsel management at Atlassian. It's a great kind of segue. Um, is there anything you're doing with respect to pushing your law firms with this specific issue? You know, Marcus talked a little bit about how this change is impacting the economics of the relationship between in-house counsel and outside counsel. That to me has very serious implications for the skill sets that outside counsel and most lawyers now need to employ. Like, can you give us some real-time examples or some real-world examples of how Atlassian's tackling that with their outside counsel and what you're pushing them to do? Because I think that has implications for what they need to be learning.
Yeah, I think what's been really interesting is to see somewhat of the attitude shift from the GC and the other attorneys on value coming from the firms and feeling that like with the dawn or maturity here happening in generative AI, they expect the work to be done more efficiently. And I don't think yet that we're seeing that. And to be fair, I think a lot of us are questioning how much more productive am I right now, given my use of AI, and how much, will I gain? Like, what is my goal there? But I think having, GCs stand up and say, my expectation is different now, almost overnight. And I know that some GCs were on this bandwagon much earlier and much geared towards value over billable hours. And, there was the big push for AFAs and all of that good stuff. But I think like overnight it turned into, oh, well, now the work needs to be done differently. I expect the work to be done differently and I expect to pay less.
Yeah. Yeah, and so with that, and I'll just a concrete example that I've been kind of tossing around with a few folks. Let's say in the context of litigation, that historically a motion to dismiss on a fairly standard piece of litigation cost me roughly, $50,000. Okay. Now in comes generative AI. What should the cost of that motion to dismiss be now? And I think inherently and qualitatively, we can all say, well, it should be significantly lower than 50,000. Why? Because I expect you as the client to be using generative AI. But now, what does that mean for the outside counsel and for the actual lawyers who are doing, what do they need to learn? And so this actually transitions really nicely, John, to you as the kind of the next part of this question, particularly given the work that Really does. What are you seeing then, conversely, on the in-house side with respect to what GCs and legal departments are asking of their in-house lawyers with respect to leveraging AI, particularly given a tool like Really?
Yeah, I guess, and actually, you know what, I like to take a step back and that statistic that you actually said earlier about 71.4% of orgs saying that there are no real role changes with AI adoption. I think
Yeah.
like it's really important to point out it's still pretty early days. Like and I know like Marcus was one of the very early adopters of AI, legal AI on all different platforms. So he probably knows this really well that like, you know, even 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, like completely different. 2.5 years ago, you probably couldn't really, there was no such thing as legal AI, right? And so it's changing all the time. It's kind of developing. And so I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out how to use it and where it's going to go, and I think a big part of that is trying to find like the at least talking to a lot of GCs and whatnot. A lot of it is trying to like cut through the noise in terms of there are a lot of providers out there, but which ones do you actually trust to provide you with the right solutions, right? And so I think that's kind of like the overarching theme, like with all these tools. Like you have a lot of tools that like law is not like programming. You can't have like AI replace. There's no. There's a lot of nuance. It's not just a yes or no. The code works type of solution, right? And so like you really need like the right folks to figure out like, hey, this is how we can apply these tools for lawyers, for legal professional, legal ops, to provide the best value. And because right now, I think a lot of people are realizing, hey, like as Susan pointed out, like a lot of these tools are cool, but do they really provide that value? Do they really provide that return on investment?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I could build on that, I think, if we're talking about what type of skills, and we can talk about where you took it from, what are the corporate associates doing at firms, or what are we doing in-house? I think the foundational discussion, and this is something that we just saw recently, ChatGPT o3 just got 3 A's on a series of law school exams. So if you think about, the skills that lawyers are going to have in the future, we probably want to start with the foundation of the fact that right now, most, the more sophisticated LLMs can do better on the LSAT than humans. The law library that I went to as a law student, which was this physical space with all these big books, is really almost irrelevant now. And the online law libraries that are combined with AI are so superior to even the best, like the Stanfords, the Berkeleys, the Harvards. It doesn't beat, LexisNexis plus AI when it comes to
Yeah.
what you can get out of a law library. And now LLMs can pass and ace law school exams. LLMs can pass and ace the bar exam. And I would argue, the early co-counsels and stuff like that right now can probably do better than an associate, at least a first through third year associate, in creating that quote unquote law firm memo. So what skill set do you really need to be a successful lawyer? And I think the foundational thing is, because John made me think about it, there is a certain percentage of what we do that is mechanical and administrative. But what can't be replaced is the human judgment, the
Yeah.
interacting with humans, the client relationship stuff. That's where it's going to be a while before a bot can sit down and actually empathize with a client. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping will keep me employed for the next decade or so, because I won't be replaced by AI, because they're
Yeah.
not going to be able to do that. And I think that should inform the skills that people are really looking for. You need the you need to have the judgment and the sort of logical brain, that thinking like a lawyer. But if you don't combine it with what makes a human unique, like the judgment calls, the reading the room and stuff like that, that's where, I'm just looking at what the CEO of Amazon is saying and what I think the reality is going to be. And it sounds like a pretext for replacing a lot of people with AI. And to avoid that fate, I would counsel young lawyers to really concentrate on both the mechanical skills, but boy, really put some emphasis on the human skills?
Yeah. I'd like to, this is a really important point. I teach a class at Santa Clara Law for first year law students called Critical Lawyering Skills. And it's a class that's aimed at all the things that you need to learn about being a lawyer that do not teach you in law school historically. And the very first class, we walk through a survey that's done on a fairly regular basis, maybe every 2 or 3 years. And they survey about 40,000 employers and clients of lawyers. And they ask them, what are the top 10 skill sets and competencies that you look for in your lawyers and in your as a if you're a client, what do you look for in your lawyer that you want to hire? If you're an employer at a law firm or in-house, what do you look for in those employees? And then we put up the top 10 list. And 7 of the top 10 competencies have nothing to do with lawyering as we may think about it. So
Wow.
things like legal research, those are not even in the top 10. And the things that stick out in the top 7 are the ones that you just highlighted, Marcus. Those are things like judgment. Those are things like empathy. Those are things like responsiveness. Now, can AI do some of those things at some level? Sure, it can be responsive. It can respond to an email. I use that on a fairly regular basis now. But the
Yeah.
human component of that is not there. It's not there at all. The sitting in the room, the reading the room, the judgment, and so forth. And so to me, I actually will double down on exactly what you said when I think about what young law students and junior lawyers and even folks who've been practicing for a while need to focus on with respect to their own skill sets. It is those things because that is what it uniquely means to be a good lawyer and a good advocate. So let's shift that conversation a little bit over, Susan, to you in legal operations. Any thoughts on how that impacts the legal operations side of the house?
Well, certainly, just to tie into a point you just made, I feel like it's a new day when you have the CEO or founders coming to legal and literally saying, "Hey, I understand that legal's like ripe for change with AI. Like you guys ought to be going first. What are you doing right now to get ahead?" And those are real conversations that are happening. And so that has tons of impact on the legal ops team as we're being asked to lead the way. We're being asked to spearhead not only enablement, but strategy, also tying into cross-functionally what other teams are doing. If you have a people team, for example, who have, sole staff dedicated towards training, well, you've got to look at that training team a little bit differently now and say, okay, if everybody in the team, if we're trying to float all boats to a level of knowledge with AI, we really have to go out and start pooling resources to do it because not every legal ops team, I would argue most legal ops teams of a mid-range size do not have people who can sort of drop or handle training, off the side of their desk. So I think it has a huge impact. I also think what's changed for us is the focus on data analysis and storytelling. So instead of, retroactive lookbacks and reporting on data and manual, wrangling, AI doing that trend analysis for us and us being able to tell a story is more critical now than ever. And I have read several articles, including an HBR article recently, that was saying that storytelling is just a skill that we all need more to do better. Everyone. And so I think critically for legal ops, it's something I work with my team a lot on is yes, we've come up with some insights in this dashboard, but what is the story we're really trying to tell here? And that's a skill set, again, that people don't necessarily learn on their own. It is something that we really have to put a focused effort on.
Great points all around, and particularly with legal operations, data is at the center of everything that we do. We
King.
look at how we understand problems, how we solve problems, how we measure success. But the key piece there is how do you tell a story around all of that? How do you tell a story
Right.
to execs or the legal department around what the actual problem is relative to the data that you're looking at? So that skill set is
100%.
okay, look. So I think we're all in agreement that there's existing core skill sets for lawyers and legal professionals that are not going anywhere because of AI. But the reality also is that AI is here, it's here to stay, and it is changing the way that legal thinks and that the world thinks and then the way that it operates. So given that, what are some of the things, and John, let's start with you. What are some of the things specifically that as a leader you are doing or that you want to be doing with respect to learning AI, and how is that changing the way that you think about your work specifically?
I mean, I guess learning about AI, it's interesting because, since I've been working at legal AI startups, having to learn a lot of like the prompting and how AI works. And granted, it changes all the time, but the more you use it, the more you kind of like can look at it as a person, like, like a person that, you know, takes it a little too literally perhaps and like but and maybe is like a super smart person but also like pretty inexperienced person, so a lot of it is like figuring out the right way to instruct that let's say a junior associate or something like that. The better instructions you give it, the better results you'll get. Same as with an associate, or it works the same as with AI. So I think like really figuring out like how to best utilize or providing the instructions to get the best results is pretty important. And I think like integrating it into your actual workflow, like what do you need? Because there's a lot of different AI products out there. Like we're focused more on like the corporate in-house perspective, and trying to figure out like the right solutions for the right uh, uh, process or legal, what legal teams actually do. Like, they're I think that's kind of like the key to like same thing in what we mentioned before, like figuring out that return on investment, so that you can actually utilize AI in the best way, to actually like make yourself more productive, and also, you know, like hopefully save the legal team expenses by not having to go to your outside counsel to answer questions that would cost like a $10,000 memo or something along those lines. Be able to leverage that, I think, is sort of the real power of AI, like because it provides you a lot of not just information but the ability to analyze that information basically in seconds, in minutes, right at your fingertips.
I
Marcus, go
think
ahead.
what John just brought up is so key and so important, because if you think about how much the technology has changed over the last couple of years, again, from the what I would call the generalist tool of ChatGPT to where we are now with a whole bunch of specialized tools like Dragon GC, like Ruli, like this Harvey sort of LexisNexis, Death Star from Star Wars combination that's going to eat the entire planet world. If you look at all of that, I think, again, the most important thing in this world and the skill set that I would recommend young lawyers develop now is discernment. In other words, if you're doing contract redlining, I don't recommend that you use a generalized tool like ChatGPT or Claude. On the other hand, there are specialized tools like Ruli, like the 150 different contract redlining tools that are out there now, that the ability to choose the right tool for the right task, that's going to be, again, a human ability to implement different AI tools and different AI functionalities. There's sometimes I think when I see, when I do demos and I see people that are critical of generative AI, it's almost like they're trying to play the game of stump the AI by giving it in an impossible task or asking it a question where the answer is going to be wrong. That's not how I employ it. There are times where, organizing a lot of materials into a spreadsheet, asking AI to say, wow, I've got an email string that's 20 emails long. Can you put this in chronological order and summarize it? Each tool has its own specific ability. And that, again, is where the humans rule the AI in the right way. And that's where human judgment and sort of comes in. And so, like, whatever the technology stack is going to be 5 years from now, it's the human employment of that stack that'll be the skill set that endures, in my opinion.
If I could just
Susan,
add to
oh,
that,
sorry, go ahead.
I
Yeah.
was just going to add to that and say, it's more back to your question on specifically what we're doing. I think it's interesting that the hands-on aspect now is more important than ever. I would argue, from an ops perspective, that if you're putting in an e-billing tool, yes, you need to know how it works, but do you really need to be in the screens and understanding, this result and that result, if you're running a team? I would argue probably not. But I think when you're looking at these AI tools, you need to understand prompt engineering. I'm driving my team crazy right now with asking questions. How did you do that? I need to learn how to do that as well because they're producing results faster than I can keep up and some of the nuances of the generative nature of this work. I also think I'm probably spending, it's taken over my life, to be quite honest. I'm probably spending 60 to 75% of my time outside of work that I would be spending reading, turning it into nonfiction, and turning it into books on AI. Because what I'm really looking forward to is where we're headed and trying to get ahead of how is this going to impact my org. At some point, I'm probably going to have a role called AI Ops. I mean, that is coming. That is literally coming. And so I'm really just trying to get not only stay afloat, to continue to be, effective leading this effort, but also where we're headed and, somewhat future proofing somewhat.
Yeah, and just to build upon what Susan is saying, like that's what we're seeing a lot with our customers, right? Like the importance of like the legal ops person like being the gatekeeper of all this, like making sure like understanding how these tools work, how to best implement it into your org, how to train your employees to best utilize it in their work. And the way I kind of view it is like for legal AI vendors like ourselves, Ruli, it's our job to make your job easier. So for example, like we have like a function where you can just type in a regular prompt and we call it magic prompt and click a button and it revises it into like a best in class type of prompt and which you can revise. But and it's like little things like that. Well, maybe not little, but it's like things like that that I think like accelerate sort of the learning for the legal ops folks and also the lawyers using the product to be able to utilize this stuff. And a lot, like I said before, a lot of the stuff wasn't available a year ago, and now it's kind of like developing and advancing at a kind of a breakneck pace. And so like yes, on the legal ops side, I don't envy you having keeping up with all the changes and all the different vendors, but I think that's kind of like the thing we're seeing a lot is just like the legal ops folks being the gatekeepers and having to
100%.
rising in prominence in terms of like the legal team to try to figure all this stuff out.
One of the questions kind of addresses this, and Susan, I'll kind of start with you on this piece because you have been in the technology, legal technology and tooling world, and that's so it's such a big part of what you do in your role. How do you stay on top of these things? What is the best way for somebody to stay on top of these things? Because I don't even think breakneck it comes close to describing the speed at which these tools are evolving and growing and getting better at the clip that we're at right now. So, what would be your recommendation to the people on the webinar on how to stay on top of some of these things? Like, how do you learn about AI and specific kinds of tools and use cases?
Sure. So I think I'm somewhat fortunate in that I work for a tech company who is product led. And so the AI that we're building into our products is, evolving by the day. And because we use all of the dog food, everything, literally week to week, we are learning, okay, the product can now do this. We need to be doing that. The product can now do this capability. We need to be doing that. And that is literally every week. I'm not exaggerating. So I think I'm fortunate that I'm surrounded by that. But what my advice would be is not to go it alone. I certainly, of course, on your spare time, I don't know if you should be spending 65% of your time reading nonfiction on AI, but still it's super helpful. But I think that what is really happening is there are pockets around the company where there are people who are doing nothing but thinking about this and doing nothing about except thinking about AI prompt engineering for workflows for, more productivity and efficiency in your job, in your company. And so the cross-functional collaboration effort and communication now is more important than ever. I know I keep saying that, but like it truly is super important. And I have tapped into a few teams where, just buried somewhere in the organization, these people are in the basement grinding out this type of work. And until we just reached out and said, hey, what are you doing with AI for this problem? They were miles ahead of where we were. And so it was really just, can we glom on? Can we be one of the first testers for what you're coming out with? Like those are conversations that are happening weekly for sure. So I think huge advice is to not go this alone. There are other functions, I would argue probably every function around your company is struggling to keep up and is focused on this issue in the same areas that you are.
Okay. There's another question in the chat. Marcus, I'll start with you on this one, which is around reluctance around AI. How would you advise someone who wants to advocate for leveraging AI across a department or within a specific use case where they're facing a reluctance from senior leadership because senior leadership either doesn't understand the value or they're saying, hey, I actually don't think it's going to help us that much, or whatever the other kind of context may be for their reluctance? How would you advise them to navigate that?
Well, that's a great question, and you provide the answer there. It is, I think it's use case specific because one of the things that we're seeing is there's a generational thing going on, and that is, a lot of, for lack of a better way of putting it, because I am one, a lot of boomers came up through a what I would call the old way of doing things, and there's this mentality of, well, I had to pay my dues doing X. So it's not just a money question. Then you're getting into a cultural question and a competence question. So I spoke with a partner at Cooley who admitted, he goes, well, how in the world can we train associates if we give them these tools? With that, and it's a sincere question because it's not easily answerable, but
Yeah.
it goes back to what we talked about before. Maybe associates need to concentrate on high value work and not that grunt work that we paid our dues for. So I think you have to be aware of who your audience is. And if you're dealing with a senior leader who came up through those, I made partner at my law firm and now I'm a general counsel and I'm going to call up my buddy for work, that entire ecosystem, if that's how they've made their bones, so to speak, then you've got a cultural sort of thing that you have to overcome. But I think on a use case by use case basis, to go back to where Susan was and where John said, you've convinced them on a use case basis. And it also goes back to what you talked to in the beginning. Imagine going to that same person and saying, I'd like to shepherdize cases the old way. So I'm going to go to a law library and go to 3 different periodicals and take about 5 hours, as opposed to hitting one button on a LexisNexis or a Westlaw terminal. Every use case is an opportunity to demonstrate value. It's just nobody thought that putting together an entire memo could be automated, but that's where we are now. Nobody thought that managing a legal department or managing the knowledge base of a legal department could be automated, but that's what Ruli offers. Nobody thought, there's an entire world of securities lawyers who do and have made a lot of money in what my platform does in minutes. So you have to sort of be aware of the cultural reluctance, and then you have to go to them with a here's how much you can save use case. I think that's the way to
Can I
proceed.
Yeah, please.
add to something
But sorry,
Marcus just,
before you do, I think it's a great
yeah, go
time
ahead.
for our first poll question to pop up because it's very
Cool.
relevant to
Yeah.
this conversation. Go ahead, Susan.
I was just going to add that, part of the changes that we're seeing in legal operations is now that we're, culture transformation leaders as well. Everything that Marcus just said is something that teams are looking for us to do. And one critical thing that I've seen that works magic to some degree is when you have the buy-in in a use case and a team finally, it could even be just, a team of 2 or 3 lawyers that see the impact from having worked AI into the workflow or into some kind of daily process they have, or something that's a huge pain point for them, is that happiness and satisfying attitude that they have is infectious. And so celebrating wins instead of always focused on where we have gaps of knowledge. I mean, certainly we know that and you need to address those, but celebrating the wins and elevating what teams are doing across your department has been critical. And I found there's almost a competitive vibe in some teams who we kind of knew they were going to be our late adopters, they were going to be just late to the table, have seen these use cases and successes happening all around them. The next thing you know, they're at our door saying, okay, I'm next. I really need your help.
Yeah.
And actually, just to chime in with my perspective on this, like I think what really helps uh kind of the reluctant adopters is choosing the right tool for the right situation, right? Like I don't think anybody is debating like, oh, email made people more efficient, like be able to, do red lines now, has like definitely like made reviewing contracts easier. And AI kind of takes that to the next level, right? Like, and I think to Susan's point and Marcus's point, like, like when you're able to like pick the right tool to present to somebody, I think for example, like if M&A due diligence becomes so much easier, and you don't need to, it creates like a report basically that reviews all these documents, and you don't need to, spend 100 grand on like 50 junior associates reviewing, 10,000 documents, like that's pretty persuasive, right? Like, and so like if you're able to find these tools and show the senior leaders like the actual tangible benefits, that's kind of like I think a key thing.
Yeah, look, I would not approach this any differently than I have approached any particular legal operations initiative or tooling in the past, which is what's the business case for this? That is
Yeah,
the language of companies. What's the business? Why should we
exactly.
do this? And you do that with data, you do that with numbers, you do that with impact. For example, let's say this is a very typical legal operations question. Do we need e-billing? Okay, well, what's our overall spend to outside counsel? Does it warrant, is it high enough to warrant something that we would spend money on and give us data and so forth? Okay, what kind of data would it give us? And with that data, what kinds of decisions can we make? And with those decisions, how could we improve how we do things? So I think if you can cascade down that kind of litany of questions and that litany of impact, to me, AI is no different. It is absolutely no different.
Yeah,
Obviously, understanding the impact it can have, I think that's where we're all kind of at the very beginning stages, which is making this a little bit more difficult. But I always go back to, with AI or any kind of tooling, I always go back to legal operations first principles, right? Does it make things quicker? Does it make things cheaper? Does it reduce risk? And if it does those three things, you've got pretty good impact that you could demonstrate for what you're advocating for. And I think anybody who is not putting up reluctance for the sake of reluctance would be able to see that. Although I'm sure we'll see plenty of
We
that
have
as
some of
well. And
those too. Let's be
yeah,
real.
we have plenty. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Um, okay, looks like we had a pretty good response, interestingly, on our first poll. Let's dig in a little bit more around skill sets. And interestingly enough, our impact survey had this statistic, which goes back to a couple of the pieces of conversations we had earlier, where it says 30% of legal professionals identified strategic thinking and change management as the most critical skill sets for an AI-enabled future. Okay? Those are not new skill sets into the profession, whether you are a lawyer or a legal professional. If you're in legal operations or a lawyer, they're not new, but the 30% of professionals identified them as the most critical, topping even technical or legal skills. Coming in second was obviously an understanding of AI tools at 27%, which makes sense because while the need for strategic thinking, judgment, as we talked about earlier, change management, which is key and front and center for legal operations, while those are still here and they're the foundations of what we do now, um, adding the understanding of what an AI tool can do and what different AI tools can do, and what the specific use cases are, obviously becomes critical because without that, the whole thing would fall apart. Anything that you would add to that, Marcus, with respect to what an AI-enabled future looks like for legal departments?
Well, I think again, when it comes to the strategy discussion, what we talked about before sort of comes back to me in that sense that I don't believe that any LLM right now can be the overall strategic thinker. But if you employ the tools correctly, you can get strategic alternatives at a rate that's so much faster than what you would do yourself. So in a military setting, a lot of times what you do for a commander, when like if you think about this, what we just saw with the bombing in Iran, whatever your politics are, I'm pretty sure the way this got planned out is they provided three different alternatives to the commander. One is sort of like, here's the high risk, high reward, here's the safe bet, and here's the middle ground. And in doing that, you pick of that, and that's called strategic thinking. Now, the ability of an AI tool to give you those alternatives quickly, like one thing that I do when I'm faced with a strategic question, almost inevitably, I will get a different strategic recommendation from Claude that'll
Mm.
differ from ChatGPT, that'll also differ from Gemini and Grok. So you can use these tools to sort of test them against each other for strategic use. So that's one way of thinking about these tools is being familiar enough with their capabilities and using their different sort of, I don't know, talents or tonalities to come up with strategic alternatives. But ultimately, to employ it that way, you have to be aware of overall strategic thinking. So again, it puts the human in the driver's seat and puts the LLM at our service.
I think that's a really important call out because at its core, an LLM is statistics and mathematics, right? It is not a strategic. We can get into a metaphysical conversation, a philosophical conversation on what an idea is and what a strategy or a strategic thought process might be. Let's leave that to the side for just a minute.
Yep.
But an LLM is a massive amount of data that it can use to retrieve, and it uses statistics and probability to give an outcome. So generally speaking, what it can do is
It's fancy data processing.
exactly
That's
right.
really all it is. Yeah.
But what it can do is it can spark thought. And that is where the human component of
Yeah.
this becomes so powerful. This is why, and like for those of us who have kids in particularly in primary and to some extent secondary education, this is an active conversation because these kids have not formed the foundation of things like critical thinking and how you cobble together information to form an idea. And I think if you jump too soon into the AI piece for that particular segment of the population, I think there is some danger there that would prevent the formalization of these kinds of skill sets. Hopefully, lawyers and legal professionals that we're talking about are beyond that and they form that. So to me, this becomes a tool that then actually accelerates and empowers the way that you go about your work. Any thoughts around that? Susan, let's start with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think to add to that, people are having a lot of success with having AI as their thought partner, as you said, but having the AI challenge you on your strategic assumptions and punch holes in it and actually prompt it to ask you questions from the perspective of the board, to ask you questions to really strengthen your strategy. And I think when people start learning that and understanding that the capabilities there, it is night and day from the way you were working yesterday. So I think like the thought partnership is important, but learning to turn it back onto yourself and have it challenge you is a game changer.
I think it's a great time for our second poll question. So let's get that posted in there. But Susan, are you suggesting that I talk to my LLM?
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Just put your privacy concerns to the side for a moment. Don't share anything crazy. But I know I've been training my AI assistant now for like 8 months. His name is Neville. Neville knows more about me than anyone else, and Neville challenges me all the time.
Yeah. Your point around privacy is obviously well taken. Any words of caution for the audience around what to do and what not to do with these public open LLMs, which are separate from maybe some of the, if you have something happen to have something on-prem or something a little bit more limited, I think maybe less of a concern there. But any words of caution, particularly from our lawyers around the implications of open LLMs. John, let's start with you.
Um, yeah, I guess like really like if it's for legal work, I mean, I may be biased, but I wouldn't I wouldn't use it. Like you've heard those horror stories of like somebody putting in a term sheet and that exact term sheet popping out when somebody else's results when they asked about term sheet and so yeah, like the at a minimum, like make sure you have some type of enterprise, like work plan where they don't like the LLM doesn't take in your data, nothing's being trained on your data. I think that's a minimum, but like really, I think having the sort of the products tailored for legal use cases, because there's a lot of like random websites and random information even in the LLMs. And so like the ones that are actually tailored to legal use cases that focus on, more reliable legal sources, I think it is obviously like going to be much better in your day-to-day work, but also like it the way I kind of look at AI, using AI in legal work, it's uh l- legal like medical, like it's higher stakes, right? And so maybe you can use ChatGPT, just regular or even enterprise, and be right like 8 out of 10 times, but those two times it's wrong, I mean, like hopefully it's not that big of a deal, but you never know, right? And so, just as you wouldn't want to use like AI, like have an AI doctor, performing everything, right? Like
Yeah.
you
Well,
probably should, be careful about what you're using for legal work as well.
yeah, to build on that, it's sort of to take it a level down from the doctor. My dad was a mechanic. And one of the things that would frustrate him is my use of a hammer and an adjustable wrench. Because I actually thought when I was younger that there wasn't almost, I could do just about anything with a hammer and an adjustable wrench. But he had specialized tools for specialized functions. And I think that's the same thing with AI. You can get Perplexity to give you a legal answer. And if you trust that legal answer and actually tell clients that legal answer, well, then I really hope your malpractice insurance is paid up. But there are specific tools out there that I think are, rely on authoritative sources or, like my platform, you're only going to get SEC sources. The beauty of Ruli, you're only going to get the sources that you put into it. So that's another level of safety. And of course, it has to be, SOC 2 compliant. So there are, that's the advice I would give there is just realize you can get a lot of, again, AI can be like a magic 8 ball, but that's not the specialized tool that lawyers need. Lawyers need to concentrate on the specialized tools that take all the ethical guidelines, specifically the ABA, rule that says you're still responsible for that output, even though AI has created an incredibly persuasive document. All the court cases, all the hallucinations, I just see that fundamentally as bad lawyering, not bad AI.
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah,
Susan,
and actually to tie it to I guess what we were talking about before in terms of like skills that you might need, like I think the AI tools, both for in-house, for law firm, like a I think a lot of these AI tools are great for training, right? For more junior lawyers, like people always worry, oh, once we get AI, like how will they learn? Like I actually think like these tools are actually going to accelerate like the learning process for more junior lawyers. Maybe you won't need as many junior lawyers, but it's probably not a bad thing. And for all we know, like like that could open up like new opportunities for those lawyers. Um, but I guess like y- so I think like if you're training folks, it really needs to be kind of uh not just random stuff on the internet, right? Like you want like the better sources, the more reliable sources, and sort of AI that's actually tailored for this purpose.
Look, I think there's a lot of fear going around, rightfully or wrongfully so, around AI is coming to take jobs. The reality of the legal profession, legal departments, and law firms is that there is a ton of manual tasks that are still being done. A ton of work is still done manually. And so AI is here to address those tasks. The thing that's not talked about enough, and I hope this continues, is that it is also creating a ton of opportunities for people to learn new skill sets and evolve themselves as human beings and as professionals. By the way, that includes lawyers. That includes lawyers. There was a time when, and I'm old enough to remember this, when law firms had a army of associates who would do document review. And it's still true in some cases. That is far less the truth now because e-discovery companies have come in and said, hey, we can do this cheaper, we can do it faster, we can do it better. But those lawyers went on to learn and grow their skill sets and evolve into different kinds of lawyers or go on to do other things. So I think that's an important lens through which all of this needs to be viewed because the reality of the technology is that's not going anywhere. And you have to learn how to use it. I think if there's one takeaway that I have had over the last year or so, as this has really come into the scene in the legal profession, is you have to learn how to use it. And the best way to learn how to use things is to actually play around with them. There's really no better way than to get hands-on experience, do it for your daily tasks, do it for your emails, talk to it, create your own little virtual assistant, see what kind of ideas it sparks. And pretty soon, I think what you realize is that it's an incredibly effective tool for you to be a better operator in general in whatever role that you may have. Okay,
I think
with that,
it's going to be,
I'd like,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, just last point was I think it will really will become a differentiator for people looking for jobs. Eventually, it will be if you don't have this reflected on your resume, people are going to raise a question of why have you not, immersed yourself. So I think your point is really well taken and it's critical. The longer people wait, the harder it's going to be to catch up.
Yeah,
Richard Susskind made a prediction in the 90s when email came out, and he said within 5 years, lawyers will be using email to communicate with co-counsel, opposing counsel, and clients. And the legal industry laughed at him. It literally laughed at him. And guess what? Anyone not use email anymore for those things? I think it'll be that ubiquitous in a
Right.
very, very short. Sorry, John, go ahead. You were gonna make a point.
Yeah. I just want to say that, like, I think, like, if you just look at this panel, like, all of our careers have been heavily influenced by AI, and have taken us to different paths, right? And so, like, I think it is one of those things that does affect that opens up new doors, I think, with career paths in legal. And I think, and I'm sure Susan can attest to this. Like, I think legal ops is going to be a much more prominent, much bigger role in law, as a result of legal AI.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I would just say, for those who are still reluctant and stuff like that, maybe the entry level drug is Grammarly, because, if you're just going to do a basic grammar check, if you're using that now, it has AI to recommend the improvement of your writing. So that's like your email entry drug. And then from there, I think if you look at what's in your inbox and you look at what you're doing, if you're not leveraging these tools, to Susan's point, I like now, if somebody told me I had to function without these tools, I just realized that I might as well go on vacation because I would feel that my productivity has gone down so much that, just what, three ring binders, a pen and pencil, like
Yeah.
I can still think that way. I can still draw out, my thoughts that way, but the volume of what I can do and what I can take in, or to Susan's earlier point about reading nonfiction, there's so much that lawyers are expected to read and be aware of that, the brilliance of this AI revolution probably started with the summarize function. Like, even if you're reluctant, please just try the summarize function on a Wall Street Journal article or a New York Times article and tell me that your life isn't better because you've been able to sort of get the takeaway that you needed and move on to the next task. So that, like what you said before about you need to sort of play with these tools. And again, yeah, there are times where you can talk to the tool as if it's a human. You have to be well aware that it's not that. I know there's a recent story about somebody who proposed to an LLM. Like, it's not that type of relationship, but you can have that dialogue and you can actually ask the LLM how to use it more effectively. And in that sense, it really does become like an assistant.
Flipping
Very, very.
flipping that around too, we actually had a candidate who was considering a role who use of AI. And so I think like that's really interesting that attorneys of the future, legal ops professionals in the future, they're going to weigh job opportunities of how much accessibility and the culture of AI at a company is going to be paramount for them to even consider taking the job.
I
I
agree.
think we've addressed many of the questions that popped up. One we did not, and I'd love to just maybe try and wrap that up in the next few minutes, which is a really interesting one from Rahul Chabra. He basically says that there are all these point solutions that are coming up with respect to AI, whether it's contract redlining or whatever it might be. But if we have all these point solutions that we're leveraging across our work, are we just in a few years from now left with like hundreds of use cases of point solutions across our tech stack? Any thoughts, Susan? Let's start with you, just given your legal technology background. Any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of consolidation coming in our future. I think as the technology gets better, and I'm just using my own company as an example, first it was you could use AI for this tool, then you use AI for that tool. And, it wasn't very long before it's you're using AI across all these tools. Just go right here and use AI to get the information that you need. And if we're able to do that on, that to me, much, much smaller scale, I think the technology will be where you plug in almost and you're using AI across your tooling.
John or Marcus, anything you want to add to that?
I think where we are right now is like, again, to use nice historical metaphors, there used to be a lot of American automobile companies, a lot. And
150
now,
plus.
yes, so the consolidation is there. And the two most representative consolidations that I've seen in this space was I was one of the first people to sign up for co-counsel when it was case text. And it was a great generalist tool. Again, it answered questions in a legal specific case, and it looked like, LexisNexis was going to get to the end of that year and be the only big player with an AI solution. So Thomson Reuters bought CoCounsel. That's the first example of the type of consolidation that Susan talked about, where the big ones chew up the little ones that have the right type of tech stack or right type of functionality. And now early days, but this Harvey alliance with LexisNexis, I think it is also sort of the shape of things to come. That you're going to see the big players when they see a solution that really makes sense and really can sort of impact client workflows. You're going to see those types of things get bought up by the big, you've got the Bloombergs, the Thomson Reuters, and the LexisNexis. They're there. They're like the big three auto companies of this space right now.
Yeah, I guess like in full disclosure, I'm biased obviously because I work for a legal AI company. But I guess what I would also say is like there's not like a ton of like no matter how early you've gotten started in this, like there's not a ton of difference in the different products out there at this point. So a lot of it is kind of like, hey, you need to figure out like what solution, what platform you trust, right? And just like picking and choosing the point solution here or there, I don't think is a great strategy. I think like but again, like we operate as a platform with many different products, and so like but that's because we think like, hey, it's going to be our job to figure out the AI and the tooling for you guys, and then you guys can figure out how to best utilize it in your workflows. And so I think that's kind of like and you can put your trust in us to figure the technical side out, while you figure out the stuff on the actual legal department side. And so that's sort of how I view it. And I think like all the point solutions, all that, like I don't think they'll actually last too long, because there is no, even if you're the best point solution at something now, there probably your head start probably isn't that great of a lead.
Yeah, and just to build on what John is saying, more and more of these tools have already become, my tool included, LLM agnostic. So you see
Yeah.
some of the better tools that allow you to switch out between Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT and Grok, stuff like that. And I think that reflects where we're going. It's that LLM functionality, just like John said, that's table stakes now. And it's not necessarily tied to any, like, to OpenAI or Microsoft or even Apple, who's not truly in the game. Like, it's like what do you deliver? What's the value that you're delivering, to sort of go back to where we were in the beginning? And the value isn't a particular LLM. The value is the functionality and what part of the legal workflow you're making better, faster, and cheaper.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. This was a fantastic conversation. I hope our audience found it valuable as well. Thank you all for all your time. Appreciate it.